Chapter 1. A 5 Sigma Event. The world's greatest investor. "Brace yourself," Buffett said, with a sly grin. He was sitting in a Manhattan living room on a spring morning with one of his dearest and oldest friends, Carol Loomis. A New York Times best-selling author and an award-winning journalist, Carol is senior editor-at-large at Fortune magazine, where she has worked since 1954, and is considered to be the magazine's resident expert on Warren Buffett. It is well known among the Buffett faithful that she has also been editing Berkshire Hathaway's annual reports since 1977. On that spring day in 2006, Buffett told Carol that he had changed his thinking about how and when he was going to give away his fortune in Berkshire Hathaway stock. Like most people, Carol knew that Buffett, after a small allocation to his 3 children, was going to leave 99% of his wealth to charity, but it was always thought it would go to the Buffett Foundation established by his late wife, Susan. Now he was telling Carol he had changed his mind. "I know what I want to do," he said, "and it makes sense to get going." So, shortly before lunch, on June 26, 2006, Warren Buffett, who was then the second richest man in the world, stepped up to the microphone inside the New York Public Library. The audience, hundreds of the wealthiest people in the city, greeted him with a standing ovation. After a few brief words, Buffett reached inside his jacket pocket and pulled out 5 letters. Each one announced the disposition of his fortune, and only awaited his signature. The first 3 letters were easy. He just signed "Dad" and then handed them to his children, daughter Suze, eldest son Howard, and second son Peter. The 4th letter was turned over to a representative of his late wife's charitable foundation. Together, these 4 letters promised to give away a combined $6 billion. The 5th letter was a surprise. Buffett signed it and handed it to the wife of the only man on the planet who was richer than himself, Bill Gates. With that last letter, Buffett pledged over $30 billion in Berkshire Hathaway stock to the world's largest philanthropic organization, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It was by far the single greatest amount of money ever given away, miles bigger than the contributions by Andrew Carnegie, $7.2 billion when adjusted to current dollars, John D. Rockefeller, $7.1 billion, or John D. Rockefeller Jr., $5.5 billion. In the days that followed, there were countless questions. Was Buffett ill, perhaps even dying? "No, absolutely not," he said. "I feel terrific." Did his wife's passing have anything to do with his decision? "Yes, it does," confessed Buffett. It was well known that Susie would have inherited Buffett's fortune for the Buffett Foundation. She would have enjoyed the process, he said. She was a little afraid of it, in terms of scaling up. But she would have liked doing it, and would have been very good at it. But after his wife's death, Buffett changed his thinking. He realized that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was a terrific organization, already scaled to handle the billions of dollars Buffett was going to send its way. They wouldn't have to go through the real grind of getting to a mega size like the Buffett Foundation would, and they could productively use my money now, he said. What can be more logical, in whatever you want done, than finding someone better equipped than you to do it? It was quintessential Buffett. Rationality prevailed. At Berkshire Hathaway, Buffett reminds us there are scores of managers running businesses that do a much better job of running their operations than he ever could. Likewise, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation would do a better job of managing his philanthropy than he could do himself. Bill Gates said of his friend, "Warren will be remembered not only as the greatest investor, but the world's greatest investor for good." This will most certainly be true. But it is important to remember that the good his philanthropic generosity will do was made possible in the first place by his unparalleled investing skill. When Buffett handed the letter and check for $30 billion to Melinda Gates, I immediately thought back to another check he had written 50 years earlier, for $100. His initial investment in the Buffett Partnership, Limited. Buffett has always claimed he won the ovarian lottery. He figures the odds of him being born in 1930 in the United States were about 30 to 1. He admits he couldn't run fast and would never have been a good football player. Neither, despite his talents at plucking a ukulele, would he ever become a concert violinist. but he was wired in a particular way that would allow him to thrive in a big capitalist economy with a lot of action. "My wealth has come from a combination of living in America, some lucky genes, and compound interest," said Buffett. "My luck was accentuated by my living in a market system that sometimes produces distorted results, though overall it serves our country well." To keep it all in perspective, Buffett humbly reminds us that he happens to work in an economy that rewards someone who saves lives of others on a battlefield with a medal, rewards a great teacher with thank you notes from parents, but rewards those who can detect the mispricing of securities with sums reaching into the billions. He called it fate's capricious distribution of long straws. That may be true. But in my mind, Buffett carved his own destiny, which determined his own fate, not the other way around. This is the story of how Warren Buffett made his own long straw. Personal history and investment beginnings. Warren Edward Buffett was born August 30, 1930, in Omaha, Nebraska. He was the 7th generation of Buffetts to call Omaha home. The first Nebraskan Buffett opened a grocery store in 1869. Buffett's grandfather also ran a grocery store and once employed a young Charlie Munger, the future vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway. Buffett's father, Howard, was a local stockbroker and banker who later became a Republican congressman. It was said that as soon as Warren Buffett was born he was fascinated by numbers. That may be a stretch, but it is well documented that before he entered kindergarten he was already a calculating machine. As young boys, he and his best friend Bob Russell would sit on the Russell family porch recording license plate numbers of the cars that passed by. When darkness fell, he and Bob would go inside, spread the Omaha World Herald on the floor, and count the number of times each letter appeared in the paper. They then tallied their calculations in a scrapbook, as if it was top secret information. One of young Buffett's most prized toys came from his Aunt Alice, who was quite fond of her peculiar but immensely likable nephew and made him an irresistible offer. If he would agree to eat his asparagus, she would give him a stopwatch. Buffett was mesmerized by this precise counting machine and used it in endless little boy ventures, like marble races. He would summon his two sisters into the bathroom, fill the tub with water, and then direct them to drop their marble into one end. The one whose marble reached the drain stopper first was the winner, utilizing the tub's sloped shape. Buffett, stopwatch at the ready, timed and recorded each race. But it was the second gift from Aunt Alice that sent 6-year-old Buffett into a new direction, a fascination not with just numbers, but with money. On Christmas Day, Buffett tripped open his present and strapped onto his belt what would become his most treasured possession, a nickel-coated money changer. He quickly found many ways to put it to good use. He set up a table outside his house and sold chiclets to anyone who passed by. He went door to door selling packs of gum and soda pop. He would buy a 6-pack of Coke at his grandfather's grocery store for 25 cents and sell the individual bottles for a nickel, 20% return on investment. He also sold, door to door, copies of the Saturday Evening Post and Liberty magazines. Each weekend he sold popcorn and peanuts at local football games. With him through all these enterprises was his money changer, taking in dollars and making change. What now sounds like an idyllic childhood took an abrupt turn when Buffett's father returned home one night to inform the family the bank where he worked had closed. His job was gone and their savings were lost. The Great Depression had finally made its way to Omaha. Buffett's grandfather, the grocery store owner, gave Howard money to help support his family. Fortunately, the sense of hopelessness did not last long. Howard Buffett soon pulled himself up and got back on his feet, announcing that Buffett, Sklenica and Company had opened for business at the Union State Building on Farnham Street, the same street where Buffett would someday buy a house and start his investment partnership. The effect of the Great Depression, albeit brief, was hard on Buffett's family. It also made a deep and profound impression on young Warren. He emerged from those first hard years with an absolute drive to become very, very, very rich, wrote Roger Lowenstein, author of Buffett, The Making of an American Capitalist. He thought about it before he was 5 years old. And from that time on, he scarcely stopped thinking about it. When Buffett turned 10, his father took him to New York. It was a birthday gift Howard gave to each of his children. "I told my dad I wanted to see three things," said Buffett. "I wanted to see the Scott Stamp and Coin Company. I wanted to see the Lionel Train Company. I wanted to see the New York Stock Exchange." After an overnight ride on the train, Buffett and his dad made their way to Wall Street, where they met with Ed Mole, a member of the exchange. After lunch, a guy came along with a tray that had all these different kinds of tobacco leaves on it, recalled Buffett. He made up a cigar for Mr. Mole, who picked out the leaves he wanted. "And I thought, this is it. It doesn't get any better than this. A custom-made cigar." Later, Howard Buffett introduced his son to Sidney Weinberg, a senior partner at Goldman Sachs, then considered the most famous man on Wall Street. Standing in Weinberg's office, Buffett was mesmerized by the photographs and documents on the wall. He took note of the framed original letters, knowing full well they were written by famous people. While Howard and Sidney talked about financial issues of the day, Buffett was oblivious, walking around and around Weinberg's office staring at the artifacts. When it was time to go, Sidney Weinberg put his arm around Buffett and jokingly asked him what stock he liked. "He'd forgotten it all the next day," Buffett recalled, "but I remembered it forever." Even before Buffett traveled to New York, he was already intrigued with stocks and the stock market. He was a frequent visitor to his dad's brokerage office, where he would stare at stock and bond certificates that hung on the wall, just like in Sidney Weinberg's office. Often he would bounce down the 2 flights of stairs right into the Harris Upham brokerage firm. Many of the brokers became fond of the pesky kid who never seemed to stop asking questions. From time to time they would allow young Warren to chalk the prices of stocks on the blackboard. On Saturday mornings, when the stock exchange was open for 2 hours, Buffett would hang out with his paternal great-uncle Frank Buffett and his maternal great-uncle John Barber at the brokerage office. According to Buffett, Uncle Frank was a perpetual bear and Uncle John was the ever-optimistic bull. Each competed for Buffett's attention with stories of how they thought the world would unfold. All the while, Buffett stared straight ahead at the Translux stock ticker, trying to make sense of the continually changing stock prices. Each weekend he read the trader column in Barron's. Once he finished reading all the books on his father's bookshelf, he consumed all the investment books at the local library. Soon he began charting stock prices himself, trying to understand the numerical patterns that were flashing by his eyes. No one was surprised when 11-year-old Buffett announced he was ready to buy his first shares of stock. However, they were shocked when he informed his family he wanted to invest $120, money he had saved from selling soda pop, peanuts, and magazines. He decided on Cities Service Preferred, one of his father's favorite stocks, and enticed his sister Doris to join him. They each bought 3 shares, for an investment of $114.75 each. Buffett had studied the price chart. He was confident. That summer the stock market declined, hitting its yearly low in June. The 2 junior Buffetts saw their stocks decline 30%. Not a day went by when Doris did not pester Warren about their loss, so when Cities Service Preferred recovered to $40 per share, he sold their holdings, for a $5 profit. To Buffett's chagrin, Cities Service Preferred soon soared to $202 a share. After commissions, Buffett calculated he had forfeited a profit of over $492. Since it had taken him 5 years to save $120, he figured he had just given up 20 years of work. It was a painful lesson, but ultimately a valuable one. Buffett swore that, first, he would never again be sidetracked by what he paid for the stock, and, second, he would not settle for small profits. At the wise age of 11, Buffett had already learned one of the most important lessons in investing: patience. More about this crucial quality in Chapter 7. In 1942, when Buffett was 12, his father was elected to the U.S. Congress and moved the family to Washington. The change was hard on the young boy. Miserable and hopelessly homesick, he was allowed to return to Omaha for a year, to live with his grandfather and Aunt Alice. The following year, 1943, Warren gave Washington another chance. With no friendly brokerage firms to hang out in, gradually Buffett's interest moved away from the stock market and toward entrepreneurial ventures. At age 13, he was working two paper routes, delivering the Washington Post and the Washington Times-Herald. At Woodrow Wilson High School, he made friends with Don Danley, who quickly became infected with Buffett's enthusiasm for making money. The two pooled their savings and bought reconditioned pinball machines for $25. Buffett convinced a local barber to let them put a machine in his shop for half the profits. After the first day of operation, they returned to find $4 in nickels in their very first machine. The Wilson coin-operated machine company expanded to 7 machines, and soon Buffett was taking home $50 per week. By the time Buffett graduated from high school, his savings from various endeavors totaled $9,000. He promptly announced that he saw no reason to go to college, as it would interfere with his business ventures. His father overruled him, and by the fall Buffett found himself enrolled at the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business and Finance. Despite Wharton's emphasis on business and finance, Buffett was unimpressed with the university. Not exactly turned on by it, he confessed, "It didn't seem like I was learning a lot." 13 The Wharton curriculum stressed the theoretical aspects of business. What interested Buffett were the practical aspects of a business, how to make money. After 2 years at Wharton, 1947 to 1949, he transferred to the University of Nebraska. He took 14 courses in 1 year and graduated in 1950. He was not yet 20 years old. Back in Omaha, Buffett reconnected with the stock market. He started collecting hot tips from brokers and subscribed to publishing services. He resurrected his price charts and studied books on technical analysis. He applied the McGee point and figure system and every other system he could think of, trying to figure out what would work. Then one day, browsing in the local library, he came across a recently published book titled The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham. That, he said, was like seeing the light. Graham treatises on investing, including security analysis, 1934, co-written with David Dodd, so influenced Buffett that he left Omaha and traveled to New York to study with Graham at the Columbia University Graduate School of Business. Graham preached the importance of understanding a company's intrinsic value. He believed investors who accurately calculated this value and bought shares below it in price could be profitable in the market. This mathematical approach appealed to Buffett's love of numbers. In Graham's class were 20 students. Many were older than Buffett and several were working on Wall Street. In the evening, these Wall Street professionals sat in Graham's class discussing which stocks were massively undervalued, and the next day they would be back at work buying the stocks analyzed the night before and making money. It was soon clear to everyone that Buffett was the brightest student. He often raised his hand to answer Graham's question before Graham had finished asking it. Bill Irwin, who later co-founded the Sequoia Fund with Rick Cuniff, was in the same class. He recalls that there was an instantaneous chemistry between Graham and Buffett, and the rest of the class was primarily an audience. Buffett's grade for the class was an A+, the first A+ Graham had awarded in 22 years of teaching. After graduating from Columbia, Buffett asked Graham for a job but was turned down. At first he was stung by the rejection but later was told that the firm preferred to fill the slots at Graham Newman with Jewish analysts who, it was perceived, were being treated unfairly on Wall Street. Undeterred, Buffett returned to Omaha, where he joined Buffett Falk Company, his father's brokerage. He hit the ground running, eagerly recommending stocks that met Graham's value criteria. All the while Buffett stayed in touch with Graham, sending him stock ideas after stock ideas. Then, in 1954, Graham called with news. The religious barrier had been lifted and there was a seat at Graham Newman if he was still interested. Buffett was on the next plane to New York. During his tenure at Graham Newman, Buffett became fully immersed in his mentor's investment approach. In addition to Buffett, Graham also hired Walter Schloss, Tom Knapp, and Bill Irwin. Schloss went on to manage money at WJS Limited Partners for 28 years. Knapp, a Princeton chemistry major, was a founding partner in Tweedy, Brown Partners. Irwin co-founded the Sequoia Fund. For Buffett, Graham was much more than a tutor. It was Graham who provided the first reliable map to that wondrous and often forbidding city, the stock market, wrote Roger Lowenstein. He laid out a methodological basis for picking stocks, previously a pseudoscience similar to gambling. 16 Since the days when 11-year-old Buffett first purchased Citi's Service Preferred, he had spent half of his life studying the mysteries of the stock market. Now he had answers. Alice Schroeder, author of The Snowball, Warren Buffett and the Business of Life, wrote, Warren's reaction was that of a man emerging from the cave in which he had been living all his life, blinking in the sunlight as he perceived reality for the first time. According to Schroeder, Buffett's original concept of a stock was derived from the patterns formed by the prices at which pieces of paper were traded. Now he saw that those pieces of paper were simply symbols of an underlying truth. In 1956, 2 years after Buffett arrived, Graham Newman disbanded and Graham, then 61, decided to retire. Once again Buffett returned to Omaha. Armed with the knowledge he had acquired from Graham, and with the financial backing of family and friends, he began a limited investment partnership. He was 25 years old. The Buffett Partnership Limited. The Buffett Partnership began with 7 limited partners who together contributed $105,000. Buffett, the general partner, started with $100. The limited partners received 6% annually on their investments and 75% of the profits above this bogey. Buffett earned the other 25%. But the goal of partnership was relative, not absolute. Buffett's intention, he told his partners, was to beat the Dow Jones Industrial Average by 10 percentage points. Buffett promised his partners that our investments will be chosen on the basis of value not popularity and that the partnership will attempt to reduce permanently capital loss, not short-term quotational loss, to a minimum. 18 Initially, the partnership bought undervalued common stocks based on Graham's strict criteria. In addition, Buffett also engaged in merger arbitrage, a strategy in which the stocks of 2 merging companies are simultaneously bought and sold to create a riskless profit. Out of the gate, the Buffett partnership posted incredible numbers. In its first 5 years, 1957 to 1961, a period in which the Dow was up 75%, the partnership gained 251%, 181% for limited partners. Buffett was beating the Dow not by the promised 10 percentage points but by an average of 35. As Buffett's reputation became more widely known, more people asked him to manage their money. As more investors came in, more partnerships were formed, until Buffett decided in 1962 to reorganize everything into a single partnership.